I had a problem the other day in which I decided I would make a DC to AC inverter simulation and attach it to my latest circuit, 1/2 DC PA, is.gd/1, the word half, and then DC PA, to convert the DC output into AC output, to try to conform to the story of Mr. Savo, or Savo, describing Tesla's pure zero demonstration. And it could be said that he might have messed up the story. Maybe it was a DC motor, not an AC motor, just to send us on a wild goose chase. Be that as it may, and I was having difficulty. So I decided, okay, I'm not going to attach the DC to AC inverter to the output of the simulation. I'm just going to try to simulate it all by itself, see if I can do that much. So I kept trying different circuits, and I came up with one that didn't fail in the sense that it just sat there. It failed in the sense that it failed to put out an AC style waveform. It put out instead a rising surge. And it's not exactly what I had intended. And this was operating under the real sim, vinyasi.info/real sim, not under NE, the prior, the original, more or less, simulator of Paul Falstad, because under that context it failed to operate at all. So here was another circuit that worked exclusively under the realistic simulator, namely my attempt at putting series resistance into coils and caps, and does not operate under Paul Falstad's simulator. Well, that blew me away, because it's supposed to be a circuit, came off the internet, everybody, agrees, apparently, that it's one of several varieties of DC to AC inverters. How come it's creating a surge? An unending surge. It just goes to infinite gain. And I had a discussion with Byron Brubaker yesterday, and we were talking about, I raised the issue of Mark Belanger's device setup, in which he has a water tank reservoir at the top of a hill and a pipe leading down to the bottom, and he has a pump at the bottom to pipe the water back up to the reservoir, and he puts antifreeze in there to keep the water from developing algae and bacteria. And then he puts numerous additional DC pumps along the gravitational fall of the water going through the pipe, and he said he raises the pressure to almost bursting pressure. Sounds like Tesla. And he puts enough of these DC motors backwards to operate as generators, such that they generate enough electricity to run the motor running forwards at the bottom of the hill to pump the water back up to the reservoir, and a little plus a little left over, so that the farmer can have some source of electricity in addition to other sources such as wind and solar. And I'm asking him, how the hell does this thing work? And he said, well, there's no cost to pressure. There might be a little, gradually over time, if you add up all the series pumps that are backwards, in addition to the one, well, let's exclude the one at the bottom for the time being, just the ones that are being pushed by the pressure. There's really no loss of pressure. You just keep reusing the pressure, more or less, over and over again, the same pressure, because you're certainly not using the speed of the waterfall, you're using the pressure of the water that's falling, building up pressure. And I thought, okay, but how does that equate to a circuit? Do you put a series of motors in an electric line? No. He said either series or parallel, it's going to deviate or alter what's going down the line. You put capacitors. Ooh. And now what we have is Tesla's radiant energy patent from November 5th of 1901. He makes a whole Facebook page out of it, but I also put it on a website, earthinglife.info, page 7, I believe. Whatever page it was on. And Eric gave me a little bit of a criticism for my use of that in a deviant way. I won't say devious, just deviant. Be that as it may. But the same concept of Mark Boulanger could be applied to our use of water in our home. In other words, we have a well here and a pump that pumps the water out of the well and pumps it into the reservoir tank, and then another pump that pumps it from the reservoir tank uphill to the building, and also to all the orchard, to water the orchard. So if we put pumps in line backwards, we could literally recover all the electricity to run the pump at the base, at the starting point, that's pumping this water out for use. Disrespective to any additional electricity, just enough to cover the electrical use of the pump. So now, when the electrical power goes out, we won't be out of water as well. And it's perfectly doable because it's just the same situation applied to pumping water under pressure. Whether it's uphill or downhill makes no difference, really. Thematically, anyway. And so I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. And then that raises the issue of the Testostica device at the Materna commune in Switzerland. Is it simply reusing the voltage that it maintains between its two rotating disks, and then reuse that voltage to create current over and over again? So what it means is that the voltage is reusable, recyclable, while the magnetism may not be. It may have to be consumable. I don't know how that fully works, when you synthesize electricity from its constituent ingredients of magnetism and electrostatics over time. In any case, so what's the point of this video? Well, it must be how Eric Dollard's LMD analog computer operates, that we're reusing the voltage in the capacitors and synthesizing electricity over and over again within the coils. No, there was a point to this video. Gee whiz, I wonder what it was. Oh, I remember now. So what I've concluded, those are all sidebars. What I've concluded from this failed attempt to create a DC to AC inverter is that two things. First of all, Paul Falstad's simulator uses calculus to approximate the outcome of a simulation, and it doesn't matter whether you check off trapezoidal or not, because he's still using calculus regardless. It's just less complicated when you don't do trapezoidal in the context of coils and capacitors. So what Eric Dollard has been promoting the use of Versor algebra to engineer a circuit, which is what a simulator is doing. It's engineering a live action circuit, but it's not using Versor algebra that Steinmetz had initiated and Eric Dollard had taken and evolved it to a further degree. Instead, they're using calculus, which Eric Dollard says is a mess. It's a complicated ordeal. It's like trying to figure out logarithmic tables from scratch and then do your calculations. It's too much labor. It's not in vain, it's just wasteful use of resources, human resources, and machine resources to do the calculations. Well, this may be the error, because when I put the series resistance into let's say the coils or the caps, I put it at a specific location that was equivalent in both cases, in which the calculus occurs in a reiterative, in a repetitive fashion, to get the output approximated to, God knows how many decimal points to the right of digit positions to the right of the decimal point of accuracy. But each time it makes a pass through, it inserts series resistance fresh, as if it had never been added before. And apparently, the consequence of this is that it makes inductive kickback worse, and it makes the synthesis of electricity within the capacitor better, enhanced. So the reason why the DC to AC inverter worked so well that I chose was that it had numerous capacitors in there and not a whole lot of coils. And that meant I was synthesizing electricity very proficiently rather than putting out an AC wave. So what it tells me is that the so-called realistic simulator, my attempt to become more realistic, is not realistic at all. It's still virtual and it's skewed, in which the coils resist to a greater degree than they did before, and the capacitors synthesize electricity to a greater degree than before. In other words, the consumption of electricity within a coil, or the destruction, decomposition, and the synthesis of electricity within the capacitor, both are enhanced depending on whether you use them, and how you use them, and how many, and what kind of arrangement. So it just makes the situation more extreme, such that if indeed you tried to build any of my simulations in the real world, but you put them through the realistic simulator, so-called realistic simulator, the ones that would fail the most readily will fail utterly within that series resistance oriented simulator, and so you better avoid trying to build them. While the ones that normally behave as they normally would in the real world, but now all of a sudden are exuding all this extra energy, again, you can't expect that in the real world, but at least those are the more favorable circuits possibly to deal with, but no guarantee, because since they're enhanced in a ridiculous manner, synthesizing too much electricity, creating an imbalance overall, those are not necessarily buildable either. I would like to think that they have more promise than the others, but no, because they're acting in a weird way. They're not realistic. So the realistic simulator is not realistic, and that's my own fault for trusting something that I mentioned to Byron, and he agreed that Paul Falstad's simulator, like pretty much a lot of other simulators that are industry standard, operate on a premise that AC and DC are all that exist, and that's all we have to simulate for. And so what is calculus used for? It's used for approximating the area underneath the wave to infer the wave adjacent to the area. But if you have a DC unidirectional impulse, which was the basis of Tesla's study after he came up with AC, or improvements on AC, and the oscillating currents based on unidirectional DC impulses, they have no width to the wave. They're just a line that shoots out from baseline and then gets cut off, and they come out at random intervals and random amplitude and random polarity. And they're really a byproduct of the capacitor, well, the whole circuit, but particularly the capacitors under stress, because they're charged without a whole lot of opportunity for discharge. And so they become so stressed they can't help themselves. But because this is a virtual world, instead of them breaking down, they emit all of these impulses. So in the real world, they'd probably be destroyed, is what they would do. But in the virtual reality, they continue to survive and put out these DC unidirectional impulses because they're under duress, and they can't help but burst out to try to leak out this energy to reduce the pressure inside themselves. They're like a tea kettle that's just, no opening was made for the steam to whistle and come out. It just builds up. Or a pressure cooker. There's no vent on the pressure cooker, and so the thing's ready to explode. the poor pot hermetically sealed and make a mess in your kitchen, if not scald you terribly if you're standing over it or nearby. And of course my lighting oscillator turns that into a regulated behavior, so that instead of randomized spikes, they get streamlined. They're still there, but they're streamlined into oscillating impulses that alternate between positive and negative in a very regulated fashion, more or less. They're still slightly randomized, but they're very more or less periodic within some window, of approximation. And that's my lightning oscillator. But it only operates in Paul Falstad simulator, not under the jurisdiction of the so-called realistic simulator with series resistance on the coils and caps. But see, Paul Falstad never designed the simulator to operate for anything other than AC and DC. For AC and DC, it works perfectly. And, he's a Harvard graduate, and so this is the common sense approach, is to just go with what you're taught, and everything else is oversight. And is an anomaly, it's weird, whatever you want to call it. It's lying. No, it's not lying. It's just he never designed his simulator to have caps and coils configured in Eric Dollard's LMD analog computer configuration. And so consequently, it overbehaves, it overreacts, and makes it so easy to produce these anomalies, anomalies from conventional standards, and so difficult for those projections to be realistic, and thus difficult to be realizable, buildable. You can't, because the simulator was not designed for what I'm putting it through. It's not a weakness inherent in the simulator that I'm taking advantage of. That was one of the criticisms early on. It's an oversight. Well, no, he was right. It is a weakness because it was never designed for this. That's right. So it's too easy. That's right. But in a good way. Not in a realistic way, but in a good way. All the same. Because it's teaching me something I never would have been taught in school, and nobody else has been either, and so they look at it and they think there's something wrong with me, or with the simulator, or with the circuit, or any combination thereof. They certainly never blame themselves, and they certainly never blame their teachers, and they never blame each other for the peer review that consensus has a stranglehold on, giving us partial ignorance and partial awareness of the subject of electrodynamic theory. And I am in no position to recraft, either from scratch or a further modified version of Paul Falstad simulator, to include a versor algebra approach rather than a calculus approach to approximate the outcome of these circuits. Because I don't even understand the versor algebra as Eric Dollard presents it, and I've never read any of Steinmetz's books, and I'm not about to. I take it as a dumb technician perspective. I just do what Eric Dollard says, and I get results, and I don't really understand fully why. I just know enough to know, okay, what I don't understand, Eric, I'll take on faith from you. Because all I can understand in terms of principles are the overview, the broad, generic, simplistic overview, conceptual overview, and not the technical analysis of what's going on. That evades my awareness. And I don't mind too much. It's okay. I can live with that. But like a stupid child, I do as I'm told, and I get results. And I go, wow. And then I don't win the science project at the science fair. I get booted. And I'm told never to come back. Because I can't explain myself, and neither can they. Now look what I can do, Mommy. If you've seen the movie The Last Mimsy with Timothy Hutton and a few other notable actors, along with the two gifted children, were artificially gifted. Well, they were inherently gifted, you know. It just needed to be brought out. It's very indicative, you know. The adults go, ah, you know, and the children are going, wow, you know. Only the science teacher is going, wow, and his wife, but not at first. Everybody has their resistance. Even the parents had their resistance in the beginning, but they start going, wow, and they start helping out. Oh, so cool. Family togetherness. But only after the FBI shows up. So that's the situation as I see it at the moment. And so I'm not a complete failure, but I'm not a complete success in any sense of the term to teach people. You know, I'm still kind of the way Tesla was. He didn't bother to teach anybody. He just did it, and everybody scratched their head, and it took Steinmetz to figure it out so that people could do what Tesla had did to a limited degree, depending on how much Steinmetz had analyzed. You know, he analyzed the AC motors and generators, but I don't know if he analyzed Wardenclyffe, because there was nothing to get your hands on to analyze, so there was nothing to try to replicate. And it wasn't patented, so there was no drive to break a patent, to work around a patent. So, without a instead we have Eric Dollard, okay? But yeah, we have Eric Dollard to do this for us, to carry on what Steinmetz did not finish, because Tesla never finished it, and so Eric Dollard has gone ahead and finished it, what Steinmetz had started, and completed the picture. Be that as it may, it's a little depressing for me because it shows that there's still more problems inherent in the software itself, and I'm in no position to fix it. But at least I know what the problem is, and I'm here to share with you my awareness of what I think the problem is, and Byron Brubaker agrees with me. So, you know, I think what he's done, his latest circuit on his channel, MX6 Maximus, was an attempt to get around that problem and still use Paul Falstad's simulator and not be hampered. I don't understand the circuit. I haven't really studied it. It's a little too complicated for me, and it has no similarity, superficially speaking, to what I've been studying, and so, you know, everything I've been doing has been from inspiration. You know, it's not because I'm smart and I think, you know, I figured out, okay, I'm going to do this. You know, no, I just get an inspiration, a thought, and I run with it, and it either fails or I succeed. A lot of times I've succeeded, and a few times I've failed, and those failures I haven't shared with you, but it really doesn't mean I know what I'm doing. I just have this faith of Eric's sincerity. You know, this is how I choose my teachers. I choose them based on their sincerity. You know, I analyze their heart. And if their heart is sincere, then I don't care what they have to teach. I probably will be able to study and learn it, because it's not artificially fabricated from human monkey business. They're honest with themselves, and consequently nature, by way of reciprocity, is honest with them, and because they are a natural observer without too much of a skewed vision of their own, they can share with us what they've learned from their experience, and it's pretty much the honest truth. And that's something I can work with. You know, to stand on their shoulders of experience, it won't be tweaked by policy, human engineering, to, you know, which has nothing to do with the natural world, to further some policy or another. And so then I can work with that, because I can use the other side of my brain, the non-analytical side, to work my way through the problem of learning what they have to share, without me having to analyze it until after I've had my own experience with which to analyze. You know, I don't want to analyze somebody else's experience, because I'll get nowhere. I analyze my own experience, and then at least I have something. And I look and see what other people have to say on the subject, if it matches what I've said or what I've suspected, what I've observed, to give words to what I've seen and what I've felt and what I've simulated in my brain. Because, you know, when you work with a simulator, after a while, the simulator, you start to clone that simulator inside your brain, and your brain starts to function the same way. So it doesn't matter whether the simulator is realistic or not. You start to fuse, or it's really method acting, basically. You become the character. So I become the simulator, and then I don't have to guess so much anymore how to solve problems when I'm trying to do a circuit simulation. But it doesn't mean I know what I'm doing. It doesn't mean the simulator is realistic. It just means I'm working with the simulator, not against it. I'm not trying to force it to do what I think is the right thing to do. So many times people have said, you're doing things the wrong way. You're supposed to do it this way. So what? Well, you know, Paul Falstad really can't be slighted, because he made a simulator that works in real time, and with only one policy that I know of, and that policy was a arbitrary limit to current traveling through diodes and transistors, because they have a tendency of producing infinite gain, and he didn't like that. He thought that was weird, so he put an arbitrary cap. I removed that cap because it kept getting in the way whenever I would use those components, and I was a happy duckling. Other than that, everything else has been my own inception. A lot of it window dressing, but in terms of the series resistance, that's no window dressing. That's pretty serious business, and I may have done it wrong. But at least it's instructive. What's really wrong isn't so much what I did, but so much what Paul was taught to do. So it's not his fault, and it's not the fault of his teachers either, because they don't know any better either. You know, who listens to Eric Dollard? Who's Eric Dollard? Who's Steinmetz, you know? I've heard it said that they don't teach Steinmetz in electrical engineering. So there you go. They must think it's whatever. They just don't, regardless of the reason or excuse. So we'll leave it at this for now, and we'll see where it leads us. I don't know.